While looking for my car keys, I opened my wife's backpack by mistake. Inside was a small notebook with my name written on the first page. I read only one sentence, then closed it immediately. That evening, I asked her just one question. She didn't answer. She just whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." Before you go any further, hit subscribe now, because what happens after that whisper is going to change how you look at the person sleeping next to you tonight. I'm 45 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that 15 years of marriage gives you a kind of certainty about the person you share a bed with every night. I knew Sarah's coffee order, the way she hums off key when she's nervous, the exact pillow she needs to fall asleep, even the small crease that forms between her eyebrows when she's lying about being fine. I thought all of that added up to knowing her completely. I was wrong, and it took one ordinary Tuesday evening in March to prove it. My name is Daniel. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company just outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of job that pays the mortgage but doesn't leave much room for surprises. Sarah is 43, a part-time bookkeeper who works from home 3 days a week for 2 small local businesses. We have 2 kids, Emma, 14, who lives permanently attached to her phone, and Noah, 11, who can rattle off dinosaur facts faster than he can remember to put his shoes away. We live in a modest 3-bedroom house, drive 2 aging cars that both need work we keep postponing, and have the kind of life that looks completely unremarkable from the outside. That's exactly why what happened felt so impossible to process. Nothing about our life suggested there was a hidden room somewhere inside it. It started stupidly, the way most life-altering moments seem to. I was already 15 minutes late for a mandatory client dinner, the kind where you smile at people you'll probably never see again and pretend the wine is good, and I could not find my car keys anywhere. I checked the hooks by the door. I checked the kitchen counter twice. I checked my jacket pockets. I checked the bowl on the entry table where keys are supposed to live but almost never actually do. In pure desperation, I grabbed Sarah's backpack, the worn canvas one she carries for grocery runs and school pickups, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly tossed my keys in there during the morning chaos, the way you do after enough years of overlapping, tangled lives. I unzipped the front pocket first. No keys, just a phone charger and a crumpled parking receipt. I unzipped the main compartment next, and that's when I saw it, wedged between her wallet and a half-empty pack of tissues, a small notebook with a black elastic band holding it shut. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't tucked into some secret lining. It was just sitting there, ordinary, the way objects sit in a bag when their owner has nothing to hide. But something about it made my hand freeze before I even understood why. I don't fully know why I opened it. Maybe it's the same instinct that slows your car down at an accident, even though every part of you knows you shouldn't look. I slid the elastic band off, and there, on the very first page, in Sarah's familiar looping handwriting, were 3 words that stopped my breathing for a second. For Daniel, in case. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. In case of what? I turned the page, my hands already unsteady, and my eyes caught one sentence before my brain fully processed what I was looking at. I won't pretend I remember the exact wording, because in that moment the room seemed to tilt slightly, but I remember the feeling it left behind, like standing on a floor you thought was concrete, and suddenly feeling it flex beneath your weight. I closed the notebook immediately, almost violently, and shoved it back exactly where I'd found it, zipping the backpack with hands that weren't quite steady. I stood in my kitchen for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 30 seconds, my heart slamming against my ribs. My car keys, as it turned out, were sitting on the bathroom counter the entire time, right where I'd left them that morning. But I didn't care about the client dinner anymore. I texted my boss that a family emergency had come up, which, in a strange way, wasn't even a lie. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a fog, moving through the motions of ordinary life while my mind replayed those 3 words on a loop. For Daniel. In case. In case of what? A divorce she was quietly planning? A diagnosis she hadn't told me about? Debt she was hiding? An affair she was documenting to justify leaving me later? Every possibility I imagined felt equally plausible and equally unbearable, and by the time 4 o'clock rolled around, I had built and demolished a dozen different versions of my own marriage in my head. Sarah came home around 6, tired from a full day of client calls, completely unaware that I now knew her bag held something she'd never once mentioned in 15 years. She kissed me on the cheek like always. She asked how my day went like always. She started boiling pasta for dinner while Noah ran in, excitedly explaining some new fact about the Spinosaurus's jaw structure, and she laughed in exactly the right places, completely normal, completely unreadable. That normalcy terrified me more than anything else could have. If something was genuinely wrong, she was hiding it with frightening precision, and that meant she'd had practice. Dinner that night felt like performing in a play where only I knew the script had changed. Emma complained about a group project. Noah insisted dinosaurs could have survived the asteroid if they'd just been smarter, which made Sarah laugh so naturally it almost convinced me I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. I kept glancing at her wrist, at the small motion of her hand reaching for her water glass, wondering what else that hand had written down that I didn't know about. That evening, after the kids finally went to bed, following the usual negotiations over screen time, I sat across from Sarah at our kitchen table. I hadn't planned my words. I just asked her, as plainly as I could manage, "Sarah, what's in your notebook? The one that says my name on the first page." Her face changed instantly. Not confusion, not annoyance at being asked something odd. Fear. Real fear. The kind that flashes across someone's face before they can control it. Like I'd caught her holding something she'd been protecting with both hands for a very long time. She didn't answer right away. She stared down at the table, jaw tight, fingers gripping the edge of her chair like she needed something solid to hold on to. Then she whispered so quietly I almost missed it entirely. "You weren't supposed to find that." Imagine sitting across from the person you built your entire adult life with and hearing those 6 words. Every possible explanation cycled through my mind within seconds. An affair, a secret debt, a terminal diagnosis she was hiding to protect me, an exit plan she'd been quietly assembling for months. 15 years of trust compressed into a single suffocating question mark, and I genuinely did not know which direction this conversation was about to go, or whether our marriage would look the same by the time it ended. I asked her again, firmer this time, what the notebook actually meant. She stood up from the table without a word and walked to the sink, standing there with her back to me for what felt like an eternity, her shoulders rigid, her hands gripping the counter edge. When she finally turned around, her eyes were wet and glassy, and she said, voice cracking slightly, "I didn't know how to tell you without you thinking I was crazy, or without you getting angry at the wrong person." That single sentence unraveled into a conversation that lasted almost 3 hours, well past midnight, and it revealed something completely different than anything I'd braced myself for while sitting in that fog all afternoon. Sarah's younger sister, Melissa, 39, had been struggling for the past 2 years, a divorce that drained her savings, a small home staging business that collapsed during a slow market, and debt that had quietly ballooned into something she never discussed openly with the wider family. What I didn't know, what Sarah had been carrying alone, silently, for 18 months, was that Melissa had been borrowing money from her repeatedly. It started small, $200 here, $400 there, always with a promise attached, just until my next invoice clears, just until the settlement comes through. Then it escalated steadily, month after month, until Sarah had quietly transferred nearly $11,000 from a personal savings account she'd maintained since before we got married, an account completely separate from our household budget, which is exactly why I never noticed the balance shrinking over time. But the money, as painful as it was, wasn't even the worst part. Melissa had started using something else against her, old information from before Sarah and I had ever met. Years earlier, during a rough stretch after college, Sarah had maxed out a credit card and missed a rent payment, a period of financial instability she'd confided in Melissa back when they were close, back before jealousy and quiet resentment poisoned the relationship between them. Melissa had begun subtly weaponizing that old vulnerability, hinting during phone calls that she'd make sure Daniel understood who Sarah really was if the money ever stopped coming, dropping backhanded comments at family dinners designed to make Sarah flinch in front of relatives, sending guilt-soaked text messages late at night that read less like requests for help and more like quiet threats dressed up as sisterly concern. The notebook, it turned out, was Sarah's way of documenting everything, every transfer, every manipulative message, every broken promise to repay, because somewhere in the back of her mind she was terrified this would eventually explode into something bigger than she could manage alone. She wanted proof, for herself and for me, in case something happened, and I needed to understand why our savings had holes in them that made no sense on paper. The first page, the one with my name on it, was her attempt at an explanation she'd never found the courage to actually deliver out loud, an apology letter she kept rewriting in her head but never on paper past that first line. I sat there, absorbing all of it, feeling relief and fury collide in the same breath. Relief, because it wasn't an affair, wasn't a hidden illness, wasn't the quiet beginning of the end of our marriage. Fury, because my wife had been carrying this weight completely alone for a year and a half, allowing her own sister to manipulate her with guilt and old shame, while I sat 2 feet away every single night having absolutely no idea anything was wrong. I want to ask you something here because I think it genuinely matters and people seem to land on very different sides of this. If you discovered your spouse's sibling had been quietly draining money from them for over a year using guilt and old secrets as leverage, would you want to confront that sibling directly yourself? Or would you leave it entirely to your spouse to handle their own family? I've heard strong opinions both ways from people who've lived through something similar, so drop your answer in the comments, because it directly shaped what I decided to do next. The days following that conversation were tense in a way our marriage had never experienced before. Sarah was exhausted, relieved to finally share the weight, but terrified of what came next. We spent 2 nights going through the notebook together, page by page, and honestly, reading it in full was worse than the single sentence I'd glimpsed by accident. Dates, amounts, screenshots of messages she'd printed and taped in, a running log of every excuse Melissa had given over 18 months. One entry, dated almost a year earlier, simply read, "Told her no today. She brought up 2016. I said yes again by the end of the call." Reading that line broke something in me that I don't think fully healed for weeks. We agreed that Sarah would set a boundary directly, calmly, without accusations, the next time Melissa asked for money. She didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Melissa called again, this time requesting $3,000, claiming she was about to be evicted from her apartment. For the first time in 18 months, Sarah said no. She explained, gently but firmly, that she couldn't keep doing this, that it wasn't sustainable or fair to our family, and that Melissa needed a real, long-term solution instead of relying on guilt and pressure to solve her problems. Melissa did not take it well. 2 days later, she showed up at our house unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, while I happened to be home fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I heard her voice rise before I even saw her, standing in our living room, accusing Sarah of abandoning family, of choosing money over blood now that she had a comfortable life, while Melissa was the one actually struggling. Then, in front of me, she brought up Sarah's old financial trouble from years before we'd even met, twisting it cruelly, implying Sarah had always been irresponsible and had no right to lecture anyone about money management. I had stayed quiet up to that point, letting Sarah handle her own sister the way she'd asked me to. But watching Melissa weaponize my wife's past, mistakes made before I even knew her, mistakes that had absolutely nothing to do with the woman who had spent 18 months quietly protecting our family's finances while absorbing manipulation to keep the peace, something in me shifted, calm, but immovable. I set down the screwdriver, walked into the living room, and looked Melissa directly in the eye. I told her that Sarah had shown me everything, every transfer, every message, every broken promise, documented and dated in a notebook she'd kept out of fear rather than malice. I told Melissa we understood she needed help, but we were done being manipulated, and that as of that day, she would receive no further money from us. I told her that if she ever brought up Sarah's past again as leverage, we had no problem sharing the actual timeline of the last 18 months with anyone in the family who genuinely wanted the truth instead of her version of it. Melissa left our house that day angrier than I'd ever seen her, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows in their frames. For the next few weeks, the family group chat went completely silent, and then, when it finally reopened, it turned hostile. Some relatives sided immediately with Melissa, calling us cold and unforgiving. Our aunt sent a lengthy message about blood being blood, about family sticking together no matter what. But others, once they quietly asked around and heard the actual numbers involved, went silent in a very different, more uncomfortable way. And one cousin privately admitted to Sarah that Melissa had tried nearly identical tactics with her a year earlier, just with smaller amounts and less at stake. The fallout didn't end there. About a month later, Sarah's mother called, clearly pressured by Melissa beforehand, asking Sarah to just help one more time for the sake of family harmony, for the sake of not letting money come between sisters. That call ended with Sarah crying in our bedroom for the first time in years, not from guilt this time, but from pure exhaustion, from finally feeling the full weight of how long she'd been protecting everyone except herself, while nobody protected her in return. I sat with her that night, and we talked, really talked, about how isolating shame can be inside a marriage, even a good one, even one built on genuine love and 15 years of history. We started seeing a family therapist together, not because our marriage was breaking apart, but because Sarah needed a space to unpack 18 months of guilt without feeling like she was burdening me further. And honestly, I needed help understanding how something this significant had happened right under my nose without a single clear sign I could point back to. Over the following months, we rebuilt something neither of us had realized had quietly eroded, an assumption that we were fully transparent with each other about money, about family pressure, about fear. We also finally had the joint financial conversation we'd avoided for years out of pure comfortable laziness rather than secrecy. We combined certain accounts while keeping individual ones for personal breathing room, set clear shared rules about lending money to extended family going forward, and agreed that any request over a certain amount would be discussed together before either of us gave an answer. It sounds almost too practical after everything that happened, but that practical, boring conversation ended up healing more than either of us expected it to. Melissa didn't speak to us for nearly 4 months. The silence was uncomfortable, especially around the kids who kept asking why Aunt Melissa never came to Sunday dinners anymore. We told them, honestly but gently, that adults sometimes need space to work through disagreements without going into details they were too young to fully understand. Emma, being 14 and perceptive in the way teenagers sometimes surprise you, quietly told me one evening that she'd noticed her mom seemed happier lately, even without Aunt Melissa around, and that observation stuck with me for days. Slowly, without the constant financial pressure and psychological manipulation pulling at her, Sarah became visibly lighter. She stopped flinching every time her phone buzzed on the counter. She started sleeping through the night again instead of quietly checking her banking app at 2 a.m, something I later learned she'd been doing for over a year without me ever once noticing. She started laughing more freely, not the careful, controlled laughter I'd apparently gotten used to without realizing it, but something looser, something that reminded me of who she'd been before all of this started. Around the 5-month mark, Melissa finally reached out, not with a full apology exactly, but with an acknowledgement that she'd handled things badly and had started seeing a financial counselor of her own to actually address the deeper problems instead of patching them with borrowed money. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Family relationships rarely get perfect, tidy endings the way stories sometimes suggest they should. But it was honest, which was more than we'd had in years, and slowly, cautiously, a relationship began rebuilding on much clearer terms than before. The notebook still exists. It sits in a drawer in our bedroom now, not hidden, not secret anymore, just a quiet reminder of the 18 months my wife carried something alone that she never should have had to carry by herself. Sometimes late at night I think about that ordinary Tuesday evening, about how close I came to never finding my keys in that backpack, about how easily this entire situation could have stayed buried for years, quietly eroding our marriage from the inside without either of us fully understanding why. What I learned from all of this is something I don't think gets talked about nearly enough, especially among couples who assume that honesty is automatic just because you love someone. The most dangerous secrets in a marriage aren't always affairs or dramatic betrayals splashed across some movie plot. Sometimes they're far quieter than that, shame and guilt and silence wrapped around something as ordinary as money and family loyalty, hidden not out of malice but out of a genuine fear of being judged by the one person whose opinion matters most. My wife wasn't hiding a crime. She was hiding a burden because somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that protecting me from it was the same thing as protecting our marriage. It wasn't. It almost broke us in a completely different way than either of us ever expected, and it took one accidental discovery in a canvas backpack to finally set us both free from it. If this story resonated with you the way living through it changed something in me, tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one, and I'm curious how many of you have carried something similar in silence without even realizing what it was quietly costing you. And if you want more real stories like this one, hit subscribe now, because the next story coming is even harder to believe, and you will not want to miss it.